Castle Hill. There we go. Yep. See, listen. When the Bronx come out,
Indiana, that's gonna be great.
Yoli, when the Bronx come out, we come out, right?
All the time. All the time. I love it. I love it.
Oh, they go to Brooklyn.
We appreciate you, Brooklyn.
Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy.
Stacy's amazing.
Connecticut. Nice. I hope everybody voted, doing their early voting. It's 6 o'clock. I am going to stop my screen share so we can get started promptly.
Oh, Tasneem voted, yes.
All right, yes.
Sheba.
Nice.
Sheba Simpson, amazing, running for office, powerful person, Sheba.
Up to 90, we're up to 98 right now, and we're expecting 350.
Cheyenne.
So if you're just joining us, please put where you're from in the chat. We'd love to shout you out. More BX, I'm telling you, we are here and we are strong in the building.
From Louisville, Kentucky.
All right, Long Island, Alec, the Bronx, Atlanta, New York.
I love to see this. I love to see this. All right. So I think I'm gonna stop this. I think I'm gonna stop the screen share right now. Turn it over to you, Anna.
All right, we're going to kick things off officially. Just a few quick housekeeping things before I do that. For those of you just joining, we'd love to hear where you're from in the chat. We are recording tonight's event. And when we get to the Q&A, there will be an opportunity to go off mute to ask your question, and you'll hear from us once we start to facilitate Q&A. But to officially get started, right on time, hello everyone, I'm Anna Ford and I'm the founder of Bookclubs, and I'm really thrilled that you've all joined us tonight, and a big thank you to our amazing speakers and moderator. This is our first speakers event in the Advancing Anti-Racism Through Literature series, and we're just thrilled that you're all here. I do want to say, for those of you that don't know Bookclubs or you don't use Bookclubs, Bookclubs is a community building platform that helps book clubs get organized and stay together. The first version of Bookclubs was built to help my personal book club in Philly get better organized. And now we have a web and mobile app for book club management that's serving over 20,000 book clubs across the world, which we've grown a lot the past couple of years. And I think what tonight's attendance is really, I think, proving to me and to all of us, and the engagement that we've had in our anti-racist town hall events the past couple of months, is that Bookclubs is much more than just a tech tool for individual clubs. There's real power in the community of book clubs and readers and writers coming together to share and learn and grow and activate and hopefully affect change. So I just want to thank you all for being a part of that. And this is really our first time in bringing clubs and our community together. So again, just thank you for being part of it. I think with that, I'll turn things over to my colleague and Bookclubs Chief Impact Officer, Anderson Smith, to introduce the theme of tonight's event and our wonderful panelists. So thanks all.
Thank you all again. Thanks, Anna, thank you all for being here. Again, I'm Dr. Anderson Smith, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer for Bookclubs. Allow me to introduce our amazing speakers, starting with poet and scholar activist, Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz. Dr. Sealey-Ruiz is an award-winning associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. Her latest book is entitled Love from the Vortex and Other Poems. Next up is Gabriel Bump, whose nonfiction and fiction has appeared in Slam Magazine, The Huffington Post, Springhouse Journal, to name a few. His debut novel, Everywhere You Don't Belong, was released in February 2020. And our final speaker, Dr. Goldie Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed is an award-winning associate professor of language and literacy at Georgia State University. She also serves as director of the GSU Urban Literacy Collaborative Clinic. Her latest book is entitled Cultivating Genius and Equity Framework for Culturally and Historic Responsive Literacy. Our host for this evening is no stranger to book clubs, Tre Johnson. Mr. Johnson is a freelance writer on race and culture and a longtime career educator. His writing has appeared in the Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, New York Times, Vox, San Francisco Chronicles, and the Washington Post, to name a few. Thank you all for being here for this exciting event again. And Tre, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anderson. I am so excited to talk to our panel tonight, and I welcome everyone once again who is joining us. I know we've got some people trickling in. We're going to try and cover as much ground as possible with some questions that I prepared to talk to the panelists about. We'll cover a lot, and we'll also have an opportunity, probably around 45 into the hour, depending on where you are, to also open it up to some audience Q&A. So we'll get to that in a little while, though. First, I want to give a chance to hear some amazing thoughts from some amazing thinkers here. So I thought, just in case people don't know who you all are deeply, a great way to maybe start us off is if you all could go down the line and just tell us, like, why do you do the work that you do from your particular vantage point? Figured that was a good way to start us off.
Gabe, do you want to start?
How about you, Yolanda?
You're the honorary brother on the panel. You know what I mean? You.
Yeah, no, I have no problem. I can start off. So I think that, when I first started writing, I wanted to be a journalist, right? Like I wanted to kind of report, work in like the nonfiction medium, get to the truth of things that way. And it wasn't until I got to college, and this was right around when the industry was kind of collapsing for the first time, right? And I could just see shifts in the water, and by chance just took a creative writing class, and it really spoke to me. And I think that I just kind of fell in line with more creative work. And I feel like the reason why I'm attracted to it, and like I still, love writing fiction, is like it's an interesting way to get to truth through imagination, right? So like my novel, Everywhere You Don't Belong, right? Like it deals with all the themes that I would have hoped to cover, right, as a journalist, right? Like it deals with, segregation, police brutality, right? Kind of the history of oppression and marginalization of people like us, right? And I think what I love about working in fiction, and what I love about fiction in general, is just that you can kind of make these really, overbearing topics fun in a way, right? Like there's more room to slide in a joke every now and then if you're writing a novel with silly characters dealing with heavy issues.
Thank you, Gabe. Who wants to go next? Goldie?
Yeah, why do I do the work? For all that is wrong in the world and all that is right, all that is wrong in the world, that gives me energy to work toward making it better. I mean, it's that simple. And the all that is right is really the light in our children's eyes, their potential. Every time I'm around children, I want to do better for them and help others to do right by them. I'm also inspired by Black people and our brilliance, our creativity, our genius, both from the past to today. And so, I work around people like you all, and that gives me more inspiration to keep going. And I feel like this work personally connects to many of my identities and my Islamic identity as well. You know, I feel like that reminds me to get to work and to keep going and to not be tired. And so, yeah, and I'm inspired every single day by amazing people like my best friend, Yolanda. And so I'll pass it now over to you, sis.
Thank you both. I actually needed that time too, because the cat was, you know, this is what happens when you live at work. It's not working from home, it's living at work. And I just want to say thank you to Book Clubs, to Tre, Anderson, Gabe, and my beautiful best friend, Goldie, and for Anna and Nancy for what you've built and what you continue to build. It makes a difference. Books made a difference in my life, still does, and it continues to do so, which is why I'm glad we're having this conversation tonight. When I think about my vantage point, I first, of course, think about the fact that I was a public school student. I went to public schools my entire K through 12 experience, and I have a child in public schools. I'm a Black woman, and I do this work in the hopes of having people get it right with the children in schools. I also do it because I have a fundamental belief that in spite of the things that Goldie said and Gabe talked about, we know that the world can be a janky place, but I still have hope in humanity, right? I still believe that there's something somewhere down deep inside folks that once you expose them to the ways that they create trauma in others or hurt or create violent experiences, that they may want to change. So that's why I do what I do and how I do it.
That's a great primer to kind of lay a foundation for what we're going to talk about the rest of the night. And, you know, when I was thinking about putting the questions together and thinking about a lot of like how all of us are probably getting tapped on the shoulder during 2020 in general, given all the arrests that's happened. You know, I think that people often talk about kind of like offline or off channel is that, you know, we have this experience of the gate swinging open and close on race conversations happening in the much more public sphere or mainstream spaces. I'd love to hear you all comment about like, why do you think we have this kind of like experience, or I think in particular for marginalized folks, the experience of feeling like there's an acceptable window, then a closed window or gate about when these conversations happen. Why do you think that is?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try to take a shot at it. If I think I understand the question, Tre, which is a beautiful one, that's what we've been navigating as long as we've been in this country, right? I think what you're alluding to, as I understand it, is how the status quo works. And as Sonia Horsford Douglas would always say, the system will always correct itself. And so I do think that with the atrocity of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, what we've just been living through and seeing Portland being on fire, the world literally being on fire, that I think it jolted some folks. But we've been having these jolts for the 400 years that we've been here. And I think this work is hard, right? So I think about the work of Will Smith, not Jada's boo, but Will Smith, who writes about racial battle fatigue. And this work is hard. It's hard for us, and it's hard for people who are awakening to really what this world has been, because it can activate fear. It can activate just a cognitive dissonance, particularly if you were born in a particular place. You can't believe the things that you're starting to see. And so I think that affects the staying power. And as we know, individuals make up systems, organizations, and so forth. If individuals, and I'm going to say self-work, archaeology of the self, are not doing that type of work that sustains within them, they're not going to push for sustainability of these open conversations in the companies they're in the schools that they're in. So I think it's fear. I think it's the status quo that we have been at this project of segregation and of marginalization longer than we've been at so-called integration and inclusivity, right? If you think about the 250 years of enslavement, then you think about the 152 some odd years of Jim Crowism, particularly in education. We've only been at this project since 1954, And we also know that Brown versus Board was a failure. So we don't really have the models of sustainability. The only thing we do have is the fight that our ancestors have always done, and the stories that have been chronicled in books and things that have been passed down. I know it's a long answer, but the short of it is people have to get at the individual work, sustain that, and then bring that sustainability to the institutions that they're tethered to.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of like, I think at the root of your question, Tre, you're asking like, why are folks all of a sudden paying attention to equity? Is that what I'm feeling? So,
Go where the spirit leads you.
you know, I ask myself that question all the time because, you know, we're on these workshops and panels, virtual learning and all that. And we're like, now is the time for equity. That's what I keep hearing. I'm like, when has it not been the time for equity? You know, Black and brown folks have been, and conscious white folks, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've been pushing it. And perhaps because, like Yoli said, people were forced to be still at home and move less due to the pandemic, due to COVID. And there's something beautiful that always happens when you are still, when you stop moving as much. You know, perhaps you begin to listen, to learn, to be open, to be more open. And I think that's what happened for a lot of people. And then it sort of forced us to have these conversations because we weren't moving collectively as much anymore. And I think we also have to be mindful because when it comes to equity education and anti-racism and things like that, some people are talking about it now because it's a moneymaker. They hadn't been talking about it in reading research and educational research for a long time, but they're like, you know what, there's some money to be had here and let me start. And so we have to be really mindful for those people who are not really about this work as well.
Yeah, and I guess if there's anything I could add to, I think those pretty succinct responses by Yolanda and Goldie. It's just from like an artist's perspective. Like Black people are always doing the work around this, like in the creative realm, right? Like there's a reason that when people call on like reading lists for like Black literature, there's so many titles to put on it, right? Like it's like an infinite amount of stuff you can put on these lists. And I mean, it's a shame that people aren't always paying attention to that work, right? Like I think that in some like twisted ways, like young Black writers like myself have been put in this place to talk about our work through the lens of race, when like necessarily I'm not creating it like through the lens of, like I'm just creating the work as I would create it, right? Not like totally thinking about it from an activist point of view, even though in some ways it is like activist work. But I think like the most important thing is that when the door does like swing open, no matter how long like it's closed for public priorities, whatever it may be, political priorities, then when it does swing open, I mean, it's really important for us to like clog the door, right? And like fill it up and make sure that it doesn't close so easily next time. And that's what I think was like one of the beautiful things about this summer was just feeling like real urgency every day. Right, like I guess you're in like Philly now, Tre, and I'm sure that industry is that like urgency is still there, right? Like if the world is looking at America right now, everybody's looking at America right now, and it's kind of the topic of discussion. Well, I think, you know, once the election passes, we'll see what happens there, right? But especially during the summer, it's like, well, we have to demand change in a really real way when these opportunities arise, right? There's like no rest during those days.
Yeah, one of you, I can't remember, it might have been you, Gabe, might have been you, Goldie, but this question I had in mind for you in particular, Goldie, about, you know, someone just used a phrase about like kind of clogging, I think it was Gabe, that, about like kind of once the window is open, clogging it with like kind of our stories and our perspectives. I was thinking a lot about how, like, you know, I'm a former English major, I was a high school English teacher, and a lot of what you have to do to grapple with the canon and how canons are set in classrooms and curriculums and book clubs. Goldie, I would love to hear you just comment on like why do you feel like the canon is rigidly set the way that it does, and why does that matter? Like why do we need to clog the system a bit more and the canon a bit more? Could you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, with the canon and with so many things that we have done for so long, we have simply just never questioned it. From QWERTY, the keys on the keyboard, we don't question if that's the best positioning for our fingers. I mean, research has said that it isn't, but we haven't changed it. There's something that happens in our country that we've been so used and accustomed to things and socialized in it, that even when it comes up again, or we're supposed to act within it, we don't critique it. We don't question, we just go with it as if it is the way to be. And, it's a very simple question, like as English educators, and to question the canon, out of all the texts in the world, why are we teaching these texts? Why now? And that's why we have to shift, into being critical thinkers and conscious. I mean, we've been so disconscious that we don't even question anything in education. We just go with the flow. Sometimes you can have a strong set of, we rewrote the canon, but that doesn't mean we need to teach those same sets of texts for the next year, because we have different circumstances, perhaps, in our nation and our society. And so, I ask teachers that question all the time, Tre. It's like, why do you have to do it this way? Who told you, oh, I'm going to get fired? I said, where in your policy, in your contract, does it say you're going to get fired? And so we go back to that fear. I think there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lack of consciousness. There's a lack of critique and questioning the world and practices. And then there's this fear. And where does that fear come from? Sometimes it comes from ourselves. And that's what we have to disrupt. Yoli is always talking about, what are we disrupting every single day? We may have to disrupt ourselves and our thinking and the canon and the keyboard. I don't know, but if you think about disrupting everything, that's a good starting place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great impassioned segue for the question I had to Yoli as well too. Because Yoli, I was, I took some time leading up to this week to kind of quietly internet follow all of you and see how busy you all stay. But in Yoli, I saw that you were keynoting a conference over the last, maybe I think it was this last weekend or so. And a lot of it seemed to be trucking in this idea of embracing and engaging with anti-racism work. And I was wondering if you could kind of revisit some of the talking points that you shared with people about, from your perspective, like what can people do in terms of practice around anti-racism work? Like, what does that look like as a practice? What does that look like in community with other people? And I know that's kind of a big, broad question, but given your particular lane of perspective on it, I'd love for you to just dispel some of that wisdom to some of us.
Sure, I'll definitely take a shot at it, but I first want to say, do y'all see why she's my bestie? The way that I think I want to begin this conversation is really talking about Goldie in the sense of her presence in my life, and how before you go into any community, number one, you have to do some self-work. And number two, you have to have a network. You have to have a community of folks that you are talking about these ideas with. Sorry about the sirens, y'all. That you are flourishing in your own type of anti-racism. I think what we have seen and what we are grappling with is, folks go into communities without having a full historical literacy of that community, without doing some of the self-work that needs to be done for themselves. And so if you're going into a space and you're only bringing in the knowledge that you have gotten from your graduate programs, and this is what critical humility is. These are some of the things I was talking about, your limited way of viewing. We are all limited by our position, which is why it's important for us to have an open mind and an open heart, and to really understand that the way that we see things is narrow, period. You just have to accept that. And so this idea of anti-racism, listen, people know when their hearts are not right. People know when they see things in society that's wrong, just look at the situation that's happening with the voting. I'm just talking about, I was just seeing something on Instagram, one of my friends, Dr. Adam Faulkner, really tracing how Black, Latino, Indigenous folks, Asian folks have always had to struggle for the vote. When you think about the carceral state and how that has locked away so many people of color that make them ineligible for voting. I mean, in some ways, the country has pulled out all of its stops over time to disenfranchise people. And I think that we have to come and reckon with that. I think we have to, that's the first thing, really reckon with the multiple truths that have not been told. If you want to do anti-racist work, you have to do, I'm going to use my language of archaeological digs, to really understand this history from multiple sides. You cannot go by the history that you were taught in K through 12. You cannot go by the history in your predominantly, let's say, white institution. You have to do a different type of digging and ask different types of questions and find yourself in different communities with people in order to do this anti-racist work for it to sustain. So I just keep going back to the self, Tre, and everyone, because I am finding that you can sit through all of these internet professional learning experiences, go through all of the things that your district is, and it's a beautiful thing, is offering for you. But if you are not open, if you're not willing, if you're not humble enough to see where you have perpetuated this, and I'm talking about people of color too, because your minds can be colonized. And if you have not looked at how that has to change, no professional development can give that to you. Mm-hmm. No book can make you be anti-racist. And Tre, this is why I want to lift your work up really quickly. And I'm using your work, that specific article about, you know, when Black people are in pain and suffering, and you were speaking specifically, and I have white friends and students that talk about this, because they've been taught to intellectualize pain. And sometimes we have to see pain with the heart and not with the head. And so it's great to be part of a book club, to build that knowledge, but it cannot stop there. And so we're gonna have to get out of the intellectual, what books do I need to be anti-racist? We gotta look at the heart first, read your heart, and then you can read some books.
Yeah.
Can I answer the question?
I mean, you've answered many things.
Y'all don't want to ask me questions, I'm telling you. But I tried.
Okay, we're gonna squeeze a question in for you here, and then I want to loop. There's a couple of things that I want to touch on while we have time. That I want to loop back around to the full panel. But Gabe, you know, you kind of alluded to this at the top of your kind of like opening statement about why you're doing the work that you do. You've chosen the route of engaging with a lot of these issues through fiction, and so I want you to walk us through just a little bit more about like what it was like for you to like take that approach, like why this type of stylistic approach to not only like unearth some of your own personal experiences, which are likely fraught in a lot of ways, but also to like funnel that through the world of like fiction, when so many of us like try to grapple with things in like the real world setting. You have done something a little real world adjacent. So I would love for you to talk about, as an artist, what does it mean for you to incorporate all these real experiences and imagined experiences in this type of style?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Tre, because I think that like my work tends to like not be autobiographical, right? Like I don't necessarily like writing about like myself and my own experiences as they happened, right? For just like a variety of reasons. One is my life's not that interesting, could be one of them, right? But I feel like that's helpful for me on an emotional level, right? Because like in my book, like the emotions that the narrator experiences, like they're mine, right? Like that's stuff that I've grappled with. This sense of being, you know, just kind of adrift in the world, right? Like feeling like you're not living up to people's expectations, right? Like who you should be, like who you could be, just trying to be yourself. Or even like a specific reference, like the narrator goes to college in Missouri, in the second half of the book. And like when I went to college in Missouri, like I was dealing just with this crippling feeling of displacement, right? Like coming from the place that I'd come from to like suddenly being in the middle of Missouri and grappling with these things that, these emotions, you know, homesickness, depression, like anxiety, just real like overwhelming like loneliness, right? For like the first time in my life as a young man and trying to figure out how do I cope with these things. And I feel like through fiction, if you're just dealing like on the emotional level with what's happening to your characters, then you can kind of like, you know, Yolanda was saying, you can kind of get to your own heart, right? Understand what's important to you. And like just working through stuff, it's hard to work through, you know, just staring at a wall, right? And I think that it also, like, I don't know, like fiction is so amazing because you can imagine a world as you want it to be, right? Like you can emphasize characters that you want to emphasize, right? So like the characters I usually write about, not just in the book, but in all of my work are, I feel like people that society doesn't value, not just because they're, you know, traditionally marginalized people, like, you know, Black people or from other marginalized groups, but people that are just trying to live their lives, right? You know, and like kind of reimagining what excellence is, right? Like, especially in an American context where I think that we equate like excellence with like economic power, right? Like we equate like excellence with the amount of, I don't know, like degrees you have and where those degrees like take you, right? Like, and so that part of the world, like re-emphasizing those people is, you know, I don't know, it's kind of why I do this, or what keeps it interesting to me is like imagining this world that I wish we lived in. Right?
Wow, can I say something about that? You know, I'm so grateful. I have Dr. Stephan Tolliver coming to my doctoral seminar this evening. And I think about the work of Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas and certainly Dr. Tolliver as they situate their work in, you know, Afrofuturism, right? And the power of Octavia Butler and Nini Okafor and what's the other sister, Tamari Adu. There's quite a few who've been writing. The beauty about Afrofuturism is that it is still steeped in reality and always in the hope of what we know we deserve and what we can have. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about the power of that, Gabe, and the power of your book of having real stories and at the same time marrying it with Afrofuturism to give people an idea of what an equitable world would look like, what a world based on all human level of skill and power would look like. And that's not in schools, right? So I'm just playing around with that idea too. It doesn't necessarily have to be Afrofuturistic, but our stories, there has to be more than Just the Bluest Eye, while T.T. Tony means the world to me, has to be more than Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. You know, these staples of these texts that have been passed down on the 25 great books list here in New York City. There's so many more. There's Gabe. Why don't we have more contemporary authors right on the list? So in some ways we freeze Black people in time, which is why there's the power of Afrofuturism to break that, because our stories are so much more than the same text that we're asking kids to read over and over. So I think I want to connect this to this idea of anti-racism can also be the erasure or the non-inclusion of texts that allow children, Black and brown children in particular, to dream a world for themselves. And that's part of, you know, to be anti-racist is going to take that we dream a world that we have not seen. How do you do that when you have literature in front of you that doesn't evoke the imagination? Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would say even for myself, listening to you all talk to that, you know, one of the things that I've maybe perhaps like uncomfortably said in other talks is that, you know, something that you touched on, Yoli, is that there's a cultural observation that oftentimes we have our greatest value when we've paid our greatest price, right? So like I look at how Black Lives Matter in part activates people at the expense of an actual Black life. So like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all these folks, you cite people like Morrison and such. Like we know the parallel experience of in our present time in life, we tend to be marginalized, reviled by people, dismissed. And then when we have persisted despite those conditions and then have expended our energy or had our life or energy expended for us, we kind of tip into this kind of totem place where all of a sudden now we have this increased value, and it's come at the expense of life and silence. And that it seems to be some of the struggle that we're also often dealing with, is that we have to pay some type of tide for our community to give up someone in order for the rest of us to be heard. And I think that is also a part of the dynamic that also has to change too. When I think about dragging us back a little bit to the summer in that period of time, one of the things I've been wondering about is when you all experienced, in whatever way that you did, the beginning and then arguably the still through line of racial unrest that sparked off during the summer. I'm curious to hear you all talk about, either in your professional sense or in your personal sense, or perhaps in both, how did you respond and what community did you turn to when things went up at a heightened volume during the summer and up to the present day?
You know, anytime I see unrest, oppression, I say, how can I respond with my heart, my tongue, and my body, my physical something. And so most of it was in response through my writing, through my speaking and talking about this work, through my community and folks in my village and my family who I say, those are the folks who keep us, who comfort us, who sustain us in many ways. And it's hard. I just think that people romanticize resistance so much. We are tired of being resilient. Stop giving us stuff to be resilient for. We are tired of resisting. Just give children a stronger curriculum so I don't have to talk shit about it. Everything is resistance. And, everything is a fight. I have to fight my slides. I had to fight for my slides yesterday. And somebody asked me, why are you starting with Genius? They're not going to get this. I said, what do you want me to start with? Black kids can't read? That's not where we start our stories. And so it's everything is a fight. And, we are trying to, for me, I am trying to sustain myself first, take care of myself first, and then really put things into teachers' hands that they can use. Because if not, real change. Because we had to ask ourselves, why don't we have a banned curriculum list? If you're a school district, do not pay for this curriculum. It will create hurt and harm for children. We have a banned literature book list, which is questionable, right? Why we ban certain books. But why aren't school district administrators, why are they accepting the standards, the teacher evaluations, the frameworks written by white women again and again and again? I sometimes in my mind, as I'm fighting against all this racial violence in and around schools, I'm like, it's so simple. Why are we allowing it to happen? If we came together more as in collectivism around this work and each use our positions, because we all have positions of power, parents, teachers, administrators, and questions. We spend so many time in theory and asking questions that no action gets done. And so even in response to racial unrest is my action. because I can't stand still and do nothing, or just theorize, and or dream. That's all nice. But what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do today? And that's my response to all of this.
Wow. I want to second and third everything that Dr. Gholdy has said. You know, in so many ways, this work saves me, right? Because I think if I didn't have this work to engage, particularly with school districts and teachers, I would be angry all the time. You know, it's what Uncle Jimmy said, you know, when you come to this level of consciousness and you really see what the world has written for you, to be in the body that I'm in, you know, which means that you would be enraged all the time. And I think that the work allows me to not be enraged. I am enraged. I'm, you know, let's say this, the rage motivates me. I think what I've learned to do is to channel the love, right, for this profession, the love for the children I've not met, and love for teachers, you know, for choosing that profession, because it's a special profession, right? I'm not saying others, lawyering and other things aren't, but there's something about, let's say, a teacher and being in the medical field where you have chosen to try to help, not harm, but help flourish someone else's life. So if we believe that that is really what we're supposed to do, then you have to hold yourself to a higher type of, level. So to answer your question, the work, although it's doubled and also can produce fatigue, also saves me, because if I didn't get a chance to engage with people to examine their racism, their homophobia, and all of the stereotypes that they hold, I would be burning up all the time. Having said that, having people like Goldie and Bettina Love, Kiana Cutts, there are multiple people in my village. And also Zoom, believe it or not. I think about the session that Goldie was with Dina Simmons, who does amazing work around social emotional learning and race. And Bettina and Goldie, they did something with the Schomburg and Haymarket Press. And Goldie, you don't know this, but I go back and I play that over and over. When I am feeling physically tired or mentally tired, I go back and I use those kinds of things as a booster shot. But I will tell you, when all of this popped off, Tre, I was very, very sad. And I spent a lot of days talking to Goldie, writing poetry. That's how I survived. And accepting people asking me to come and talk about this very topic, that's what got me through. Tonight, something like this event, this helps to get me through too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, agree with everything, and in particular, the points about like community, right? Like just the people the real ones, I guess, that we surround ourselves with, right? Like a lot of fake ones can be revealed in these times, I think, right? Like I'm sure we all know. And I mean, like my experience with the summer and the protests following like George Floyd's murder was complicated, right? Because I live in Buffalo now and have only lived there for 2 years, right? And so part of it was me constantly looking back home at Chicago and seeing what was happening there, talking to my parents like regularly, you know, like how are you doing? Like I remember talking to my mom on the phone one night, and she has said, like, she's, you know, I was like, ooh, like, what was that? What was that? And it was just like gunshots ringing out like constantly, right? Like in the background. And, you know, COVID is complicated for some reasons, because I just would have went back home and hugged my parents, right? Like I think all of us, you know, wish we could have done. But what, like being in Buffalo for all this has been interesting to me, because like this problem is happening everywhere. Like we were on the streets every day for a month and a half. And it wasn't just people calling out George Floyd's name, right? Not just Breonna Taylor's name, but the people in Buffalo who have been murdered and brutalized by police, right? And I think that like it broadened my understanding of how, which I guess is something I've always understand, but always seeing like how big this problem is and how like systemic, because in a place like Buffalo, where you've had a Black mayor for 15 years, there's a Black city council president, right? A Black police commissioner. It's a city that is 45% Black, right? Like this really like Black small city where you think that if equity could happen anywhere, right? Like it could happen here, right? Like there's not, people aren't beholden to whatever, the big city dollars like there. Buffalo's a poor city, right? Like why not just make it livable for people? And I think that was probably the most disheartening thing to me, right? Like to just see how reluctant to change anything, right? Like, and how the politicians were speaking towards the national moment instead of the local moment, right? I feel like that's been a common refrain. I imagine that's the same everywhere, right? But like, you know, Buffalo is still one of the most segregated cities in America. The segregated neighborhoods, the Black communities on the east side, you know, very few have access to clean water. Very few have access to education that we think, you know, is funded properly, like all these things. And so I feel my disillusionment with this kind of American experiment continuing and succeeding as is kind of intensified, right? And it was already pretty high. And after all the exhaustion kind of fades away, you know, it's just get back to work, right? Figure out how you can do your small part to change at least one cog in the system, right? Like whether, like Goldie, you know, whether it's disrupting the canon, right, in my tiny way, tweeting reckless things, right? Like these kind of, you know, we look for these just small victories we can hold on to.
And I want to give a shout out to Disrupt Text, which was started Dr. Kimberly Parker, Tracy, and I'm going to say her name incorrectly, Echeverria, and another sister. So there are resources out there that I think that's one thing, Gabe, that you triggered for me, and Goldie always reminds us, you know, teachers, for those of you who are teachers on the line, you don't have to try to invent this poof out of the air. There are organizations that have even sprung up even more since the COVID that are there as resources for you. But again, unless you have the heart, unless your heart pulls you towards that, you're not going to go in that direction. If you're only going in that direction because your school district has now said this is what you have to do, it's not going to last. So I'm interested in people doing, as Goldie would always say, from a humanistic standpoint, for the good of our humanity, for those who have chosen to teach, understand what that means. And don't depend on institutions to give you the consciousness that you have to develop for yourself. And once you begin that dig, you know, developing that consciousnness, you're going to see there'll be resources that will just appear, because that's the orbit that you are traveling in. And for those who say, how can I, where do I start, what do I do? That's not the question to start with. The question to start is, what do I need to escalate from myself first? And then you branch out. And you can't keep expecting PD sessions to tell you what to do. PD sessions can't regulate your heart. Mm-hmm. And we can't legislate hearts. If we could legislate hearts, we'd be in a very different situation. Because then it would be legal to do right. Then we would have systems, and we would have grants, and we would have all kinds of infrastructure paying people to do right in ways that we don't have right now.
Thank you all. I'm gonna segue us by branching out and doing right by the Q&A here that have started popping up. I'm going to start us off with the first two that have come in so far. that I'm going to read aloud, and y'all should feel free to pick up whoever it makes sense to answer, and whatever thought inspires you to respond, like feel free to. And then I'm going to turn it over to the book club's crew to lead us through the rest of the Q&A. And in the meantime, folks in the audience should still keep piping in some of the questions that you all might have. So the first one comes from, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, but it looks like it's Cyan Charles Harris. They write in, literature in public schools can tend to get bogged down in standards, assessment, and college and career readiness. I'd love to hear the speaker's thoughts and imagination around the question of the higher purpose that literature in public schools should or could serve. What are we really trying to do here?
So I can start with that. What you're really asking is, what is the purpose of schools? You know, teachers, no teacher I know went to school to be a teacher to do test prep and read from scripts. You have to be very clear. Standards, assessments, all of these readiness standards, that serves a very capitalistic agenda as opposed to a human one. I have made it quite plain to some legislators, to district leaders for a number of years about, to answer your very question, what should the standards look like? What should the curriculum look like? What should assessments look like? What should teacher evaluation look like? I've even gone as far as rewriting the standards, rewriting the curriculum, and rewriting teacher evaluation. It can be done, it's possible. And so each of those have been around goals of identity, skill development and proficiencies, intellectualism, criticality, and joy. That 5-part model can be a way forward to improving standards, assessments, curriculum, and teacher evaluation. It is that easy. We have, and it could be your own model. If it's not those 5 things, what else is it? We have just been trapped in smallness. And the real question that we need to ask district leaders, superintendents, chancellors, why do you keep doing things the same when you know it hasn't worked? Is it ethical to keep learning standards that are absent and does not reflect the histories, the liberation, the identities of Black people? Do you think it's ethical to still keep these standards in your schools? I mean, the answer is no. So why are you still doing it? Do you think you don't have the power? Do you think you don't have the expertise? See, we have the people who can do it. It's just ease, because nobody wants to do the intellectual work. Like Yoli said, they don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to do the intellectual work. They just want the easy toolkits. Man, toolkits isn't genius. That is small. And so what we're trying to do here is build capitalism. Be very clear about that. What we're trying to do here is give children, such as white children, more opportunities and access compared to others. Now, we know our Black and brown children will achieve despite of. And I'm tired of despite of narratives. Can we just have a system that is reflective, responsive, for all children and not just one particular group? And so what I would suggest to this educator is talk to your district leaders and pose the questions. You don't even have to have the answers. They need to have the answers. That's why they were hired as a leader. And we have to stop accepting leaders who are not doing anything different for our children year after year. And then we wonder why we see the same thing. It's very upsetting. You can hear it in my voice. It's very upsetting, and it's time to stop. And it's that simple.
Yeah.
And you know, as Goldie's talking about that, let's fundamentally like reel back and realize that representation matters. And so if we're going to continue to have the same folks developing national curriculum, if we are not going to have people at the table who will interrupt the text, who will interrupt the discourse around standardized exams, the status quo only has to, you know, you just have to do one thing for the status quo to continue. This is what my friend Dr. Laura Smith says, and that is absolutely nothing. And we often say, well, we don't have the time for it. We don't have the time to do this. I want to say, I think we're all saying that we don't have the time to not do it. This has always been urgent. It just hasn't been urgent for everyone. And so we have to look at who are making up the curriculum committees. We have to look at who are the literacy coaches in the school, who are the folks that are the curriculum advisors in the school. All of this is connected. And folks have gone through an education system and a training system that really maintains the status quo. And so every now and then you'll get these interruptions, or they've always been interruptions, but we need ruptures. And we need to bring the word of Bettina Love's work in here. We need abolition. And we're not just saying just destroy everything without building it up. You have to destroy and build up, but you have to have more inclusive voices. It's the same voices, which is why we're getting the same thing. And you're right, Goldie, it is very upsetting. It is not fair that decades upon decades upon decades, generations of children go through schools with the same experiences. And they have to fight and claw and come out on the other side, sometimes very damaged by a school system that does not recognize their humanity. And also diminishes the humanity of the teachers by saying this is the curriculum. It's wrong.
So I think this is a good time for us to take a couple of questions from the audience as well with their hands raised. But before we go to you, Dr. Fernandez, I was hoping that you all can give us at least 2 books each that you could recommend. Start with you, Gabe.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. I think that, well, the 2 that are probably high on my list, because it's kind of like book award season, like the Man Booker Prize is being announced later in November. And there's 2 amazing books written by like Black American writers. And the one's a Real Life by Brandon Taylor, about like college life, kind of, you know, similar to what we're talking about, right? Like how institutions like treat people like us. Right. So Real Life by Brandon Taylor, and then The Shadow King by Maza Mingiste, who actually teaches at Queens College. I think she still is at Queens College, but a wonderful book about women Ethiopian soldiers fighting in World War II. So I guess you should read both of those and then decide which one should win the Booker Prize in a couple weeks.
I'll go really quickly. It's hard to follow the rules, Anderson, but I will share what I'm reading now, which is Maya Angelou, Letter to My Daughters, Letter to My Daughter, and also Emily Bernard's Black is the Body, which is an award-winning book. I actually came with a few, When They Call You Terrorists, which has a new edition out by Patrice Cullors. She has a YA version of this, all about love, bell hooks. And I have others, but I'll try to be respectful. And I must say, anything by Jacqueline Woodson, but in particular, Brown Girl Dreaming.
You know, all of that, you know, it's funny. I was about to say the Bible and the Quran. Look, we talked about getting your heart straight. You know, read, if I can shift, I mean, y'all know the book list. Y'all can Google the anti-racism book list. Read Black newspapers from the 19th century. Collections are online, they're free. Go to blackpast.org. Unearth Black folks, Black genius, Black teachers.
Nice.
You know, teacher education has failed us too overall by not telling us about the teachers who have paved the way for who have like been the models for us. You know, so I'm going to, you know, I'm a person, I'm a scholar and a writer who asked the question, how can we use Black historical excellence as the model for the way forward in education today? So in addition to all those books, I'm going to push you to unearth a mathematician of color, a scientist, a writer, a historian, and read from primary source documents written by Black folks, pamphlets, our public addresses. I love the work of, she was a librarian for Howard University in the 1930s, Dorothy Porter. And she has a collection of Negro writings, and it's our constitutions of our moral reform society, anti-slavery societies, our public addresses. Read from the words of our people, and then use that as the means to understand how to better educate your children today.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Fernandez, I'm going to unmute you now. I think I'm going to do it. And you could ask your question.
I actually didn't have a question, but thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. The ancestors just wanted me to just put my voice in and just thank you for the gifts that you are giving all of us, particularly me, because I am fully fed and armed and ready to live to fight another day. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. And I have another hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby.
I'm going to go to Yarabel.
It's Jaribel.
Jaribel, so sorry about that, Jaribel.
Shout out to Dr. Yoli, who at Columbia affirmed me in my worthness, and she saw me in a way that I can never repay her. I even got a little choked up saying it, but it's something about a Black woman seeing you in a scholar institution that sometimes tries to diminish who we are. And Dr. Goldie, your work, Cultivating Genius, has nourished me in a way that you would not even imagine. I've been working for the Department of Education for 13 years, and it's for the first time that I'm finding with your work how much I need to cultivate my own genius, because if you're not armed in the counter narrative, you cannot teach the counter narrative. So I realize that there's a lot of work to be done. And with that being said, Dr. Mohammed, working in the Department of Education, I see how your work is slowly becoming weaponized, and it enrages me and fills me with anger. But like Yoli said, the rage motivates me. A lot of administrators and educators are talking a lot about identity and criticality and intellect, but whitewashing your work. And I want to just hear from you some, I don't know, I'm just trying to show up in the ways to disrupt every single time, to talk about how your work is not just to be plugged into curriculum, but really to cultivate your own genius and arm yourself in the counter narrative, so we don't teach the standard and then plug in identity, criticality, intellect, and skills. But it seems to go on deaf ears. And I just want to hear straight from you some of your thoughts on that, as you know, I navigate through this work and supporting teachers instructionally.
Yeah, no, thank you, sis. Thank you for the book shout out. It's so funny because Dr. Ruby Fernandez, she would ask me every day, sis, when a book coming, sis. So part of it is like she put a lot of pressure on me to finish it. But you know what, I'm glad you're at the DOE and you're asking these questions. You know, I'm reminded of Dr. Gloria Lassing-Billings, who said that the way in which people have taken up her work and misunderstood it and tried to appropriate it in very incomplete, false, and negative ways. When I heard her say that years ago, I learned from her as a Black woman, and I expected it. You can say I keep in mind that people will teach about identity of everybody else but Black and brown children. They will teach about criticality of sexism and not anti-racism, because girl power is easier to say for some people than Black power. And so in many ways, I expected it. You know why I expected it? Because I study history. Everything can be explained through history. They did the same thing in the Bible. I study religion too. They use the Bible and the Quran for their own benefit to fit their own life. And it's like, that's not what God told you to do. I hear some people say, but that's what people have been doing for across centuries. They use words to make it fit because they don't want to do the real work.
Yes, ma'am.
They're imposters. And we have to do the same thing we do with everything else. We have to call them out and tell the truth and not be afraid of it. And you can say it nicely if you are afraid. No, that is not the work of Dr. Goldie Mohammed. I don't know what that is, but that's you trying to still be comfortable instead of doing the real work. And my job is to call it out when I speak, when I write the next thing. That's what I'm going to do to solve it. And I hope and pray that people who know the work will do the same. But it's going to happen because it always has. And people are always going to appropriate and use things for their own benefit and comfort.
Thank you so much for that. I just appreciate being in all of this magic. I feel like some of it is sprinkling on me.
Oh, same here, sis.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm going to hop in here really quickly. I know there are a lot of questions in queue and hands raised. We're going to keep the discussion going a few more minutes, but I just wanted to remind everyone, since we are past the top of the hour, that we've recorded this session. We're going to share it with all of you. In the email follow-up, we'll share these book recommendations. We'll share the work of these amazing speakers and writers and thinkers and motivators. I put 2 in the chat already, and Goldie's book will be featured on book clubs next month. So I just wanted to let everyone know, if you do have to drop off, we're going to be following up with all of this wonderful news and work soon.
And absolutely, if we don't get to all of the questions, I will be circulating it to the panelists and they will answer it after the event. Isn't that nice? They didn't even know that they're going to do that, but they're going to do it. So I'm going to go to the next question. We have time for maybe 2 more. So, and I know Dr. Sealey-Ruiz, you have to teach, so I'm going to be mindful of that. All right, Tariq, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, y'all. So I hopped on like half hour late because I was on another Zoom. But my quick question, it's been a question since I even came into teaching, is what do y'all say to the Black and brown teachers, even though we know representation matters, even though a lot of Black and brown teachers really trying to be intentional with politicizing youth, right? So that they have that criticality as they grow up. What do you say to those same teachers when they really are like, yo, I might have to retire and call it quits, right? Knowing that the guilt of like, wow, like if I leave, I might be the last Black and brown person for a minute, right? Or at least the last Black and brown person with like an intention of like, yo, like I'm really trying to put youth on. I'm really trying to free their minds, really trying to liberate. But for me and my soul, like, I don't know if I still have enough juice in me, because one of the things that I fear for myself and for others, right, as teachers may start asking me about my experience, is the resentment, is the bitterness, because so much has been extracted from you that you don't feel like you have anything left, and then you become a part of the problem that you was actually trying to solve. Sorry, that was long-winded.
Tariq, thank you for that. My heart breaks actually as I hear that question. And I think I want to just quickly say that this is why it can't just be Black and brown folks. We know that we are the ones that we've been waiting for, but this is why it just can't be us to shift the system, right? We didn't build the system for it to be like this. This is why it must take all of us. Everyone is required, everyone is needed. And so the self-work has to be done. The shoring up of your own genius has to be done. And in the words of Jamila Lescott, you have to know what you're fighting for and against. I get the tiredness, I get that. But remember, this is a project that's been 400 years in the making, right? In terms of dehumanization, and that we've only been at this since 1954. So we have more against kind of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging than we do going forward. And it's an individual thing. That particular teachers or those teachers might have felt, I've been doing this 30 years. I've done what I can. and I'm passing it on. And if you know history, as what Dr. Gholdy was saying, you know that there will always be warriors there standing, ready to take it up. But if we're talking about real change, abolishing, rebuilding, it's going to take all of us. And that's the only thing. It just breaks my heart that people have dedicated their lives to such a beautiful profession like teaching, and they walk away believing that nothing has changed from the moment they came in maybe 15, 20 years ago. That's disheartening, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm loyal, but thank you for that.
All right, so.
It's not a neat answer, but this isn't neat stuff. I wanted to know if Gabe and Gholdy had anything. I'm sorry, Anderson, I didn't mean to cut you off, but.
No, you're right, to go to them, yeah.
I mean, just one sentence. If this is unbearable, if it's having a negative effect on your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health, then go and be well. That, I mean, it can be that simple. Take care of yourself first, because the institutions won't.
Yeah, I think that I would just concur with that, Goldie. Like the work's important, like the work's vital, right? Like it's important and it's vital, but there's nothing more important than taking care of yourself.
And I wanted to just quickly chime in, because I've been a long time educator too, and I come across this question a lot. I would say everything plus one to everything that they've all said. I would also say two other quick things. One is be sure to identify what is a burden for you and what is a burden as a result of the situation that you're in. Sometimes it's just about finding a different fit in terms of school. Like sometimes people, particularly a lot of folks of color, say like, oh, this school is shit, so therefore the teaching profession is shit, so therefore I need to leave. And sometimes it's actually about finding the better cultural and leadership fit for you. So I would ask you to like make sure you do your homework around that and be able to discern whether you are fatigued from teaching or are you fatigued from teaching the situation that you are in. I would also offer just real quick too that yes, you should not be a martyr for any system that you are working for. Like the labor is not worth that. And I would say too that it is likely no matter what you choose to do moving forward, you are going to encounter additional tensions and challenges. And so if you're not already in a practice of being in proximity to therapy, I would certainly encourage you to do so and encourage others to do so, because you are likely going to run into some type of cultural resistance down the road again too.
Wow. This was all of what I just needed to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. What an amazing panel discussion. If I know you all can't hear, but I still want you guys to clap for all of our panelists for this evening. Our amazing host, Tre, thank you so much. Dr. Sealey-Ruiz, Dr. Mohammed, thank you so much. Gabriel, thank you so much. Before we get out of here, I couldn't leave without promoting our next event, which I'm going to also put in the chat. It's happening on November 19th, hosted by Tre Johnson from 6 to 7:15 p.m. I am going to drop the link to register in the chat right now. And I hope to see you all there. And you're going to get an email follow-up with some evaluations. Hopefully we get all 10s and everything else like that. But please register. And I hope to see you all again soon. And thank you all again for just an amazing event.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for joining, and for the panelists. Thank you for sharing your brilliance, your genius, and your hearts with us. This is the first of many, I think, great conversations like this with our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for building the community. And thank you, Anderson and Tre, for just hosting. And it was a beautiful evening.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the panelists. You all made me look good and made all this easy tonight. So that's great.
Good night, everyone.
It's great to be on one of these things when you feel like you learn a lot, right? So Tre, Goldie, and Yolanda, just thanks so much for your brilliance. And Anderson, Anna, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go out and get your book, Gabe.
Yes.
And I might want to have a private call, so let's work it out.
You gotta go teach your class. Don't worry about the book.
Yeah.
Nice. You guys, safe travels on your commute to where.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
I see you.
Let me just say thank you. Thank you all. Beautiful. Okay. Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Good
you.
night. I just always like to stay